In a far-off place, in a far-off land, there exists the most peculiar of nobility, the most venerable House Shadow. In the House Shadow, a servant diligently cleans her mistress's room, as she has done every day since she was created. Her name is Emiliko, and she is one of many living dolls created by the lord of the manor to serve his household. These living dolls are quite lifelike and would appear to be human to outsiders, and for good reason, for they not only serve as manservants, but as the very faces of their masters. For you see, all the nobles of House Shadow are as black as ash and have no faces. Hey, so I'm finally back, and here's me recommending Shadow's House. Shadow's House is a series created by Japanese mangaka team Sumato. Previous works include Girigi Out, Kisei Kanonjo Sana, and Kuro. It is currently a 90-chapter manga with an anime series that will be premiering quite soon, or if I turned out to be incredibly lazy, has already premiered. Regardless, a translation of the official blurb is a good place to start. Ahem. We follow Emiliko, a young and cheerful living doll, as she learns her duties serving as the attendant for her mistress, Kate Shadow. What dangers and dark secrets will she and Kate encounter as they become more deeply involved in the inner workings of the Shadow's society? Right away, you can tell that the series is going to be about mystery and intrigue. However, don't let the blurb fool you into thinking that the series goes hard into the mystery and intrigue from chapter 1. It takes a bit for Kate and Emiliko to actually get deeply involved. For those familiar with Sumato's previous work, Kuro is the work closest in tone and pacing to Shadow's House. It starts out with the same cutesy facade of our main character interacting with the mysterious deuteragonist, except Kate is not
a cat.
In a similar fashion, as we progress through the main pair's daily life, we get hints and reveals about the nature of the Shadow's House. Imagine Gakugurashi's opening episode/chapter extended over a few chapters. Though the series never tries as hard to pretend to be a slice of life, it merely takes its time to ease you into the world so that your desire for answers is at its peak. Shadow's House takes its time to set up the mystery and build the character dynamic between Kate, Emiliko, and the rest of the cast before getting into the mystery actively. Though given the obvious strangeness of the Shadow Nobles and the mysterious rules of the Shadow's House itself, you're never left without some plot details to ponder. While that sort of slow pace might not be for everyone, you'll likely be constantly coming up with theories and analyzing any information said or hinted at. You'll definitely want to pay attention, because there is a lot of foreshadowing dropped throughout the series, so you'll never feel the story progresses via Aspel. And of course, the slow pace does give you plenty of time to get to know and like the characters. Also, worst case, you can just read through the early chapters quite quickly, since the opening chapters have a low average page count, like 13. So, assuming that didn't convince you, and for the sake of my watch time, I'll go into slightly more detail in the rest of the video to hopefully convince you. And don't worry, I'll spoiler warning anything really important. Since I'm far from being an artist, as should be self-evident, this will be the shortest section, so I might as well do it first. The art, to put it plainly, I think, is gorgeous, which I expected from their previous works. The art style has what I describe as a storybook art style when compared to that of typical manga, kind of a rounder, softer feel to the way characters are drawn, without straying into Moblob territory. That isn't to say that the designs aren't kawaii, but it fits the story. It's cutesy, but is able to carry emotional weight when the scene calls for it. It also gets a clean look, so it's easy to understand what's going on a page-per-page and panel-by-panel basis. As you may have noticed from the pages that appear on screen, the manga actually gets special treatment from the publishers, being one of the rare manga to get a colored version that is simultaneously released with the black and white. Kuro was in full color as well, so Sumato knows how to work with colors. I'm also a fan of the general architecture of the setting. It appears plausible, but also fantastical in its scale, magical realism and all that. The character designs are also generally quite pleasing. As you'd expect with a story where half the cast is pitch black, the outfits contrast and complement with the blacks quite well. The outfits of the shadows not only look like they'd fit with the look of their faces, but also manage to convey a bit of personality, such as Kate's red dress being relatively simple in design, but it evokes the mysterious lady in red archetype, as well as contrasting her colder personality. John's long coat looking like the type of outfit a typical hero might wear, and how its size lets it flow better in action scenes, etc., etc. The living dolls, of course, only have outfits segregated based on gender, but they do look quite spiffy, very servant-like, and of course, they emphasize the face. The faceless dolls have outfits that emphasize nothing at all. Lastly, based on what we've seen, the anime adaptation looks like it's going to capture the charm of the manga quite well. Sure, it won't be as detailed, but it does look like it'll be pretty. On the other hand, the CGI is looking a bit rough. We start with our protagonists, Kate and Emiliko. I can't really talk about Kate and Emiliko separately. It'd be like talking about coffee without the cream, Rainer without his depression, or me without this couch. Just another shitty stick figure, and there's enough YouTubers like that. For several chapters, their interactions with each other are the only character interactions, and we see the biggest changes in them from how they interact with each other, and later on, how that affects how they interact with other characters. I really like their intro pages. Emiliko and Kate's intro pages instantly introduce you to the concepts of living doll, their relationships to a shadow, and the mystery of the shadow nobles. The rest of the chapter does a good job of establishing the early character and relationship of Emiliko and Kate. From the very start, we see that Emiliko is bright, curious, and a bit of a ditz. Similarly, we see that Kate is guarded and anxious towards Emiliko. She comes off as a bit distant, but not without kindness. These and the next few chapters really establish the kind of people the main duo are. Since the two of them are the two most important characters, there's debate to be had on who is best girl. Who is main character, because it's not a debate. Kate is indeed best girl, and Emiliko agrees. However, with regards to being the main character, Emiliko might be the main character by virtue of having longer stretches as the primary POV, but I believe in terms of character development and pushing the story forward, Kate wins out. Kate is the one who comes up with their plans to progress their agenda. Furthermore, being a shadow, she's the one most characters focusing on when interacting or acting against the pair. She's also the one who has a change in personality. For you see, Emiliko stands in contrast to most protags of mystery stories in that she's not super smart nor super skilled. However, her skill is her ability to make friends. This isn't the sort of story where a lone protagonist fights the entire world alone, and in that regard, Emiliko's ability to change others into friends is perhaps more useful than Kate's intelligence and other abilities. Emiliko is not really a dynamic character. She's more of a flat character, and her growth is mostly a growth in competence, not in attitude. However, she's great in bringing about character growth and change in other characters. Her ability to understand how Kate acts and thinks lets her maximize her own utility in Kate's plans. And her never-give-up attitude is infectious and really helps Kate along. Kate, for her part, becomes a much kinder and empathetic person from hanging around Emiliko, which becomes a valuable tool for navigating Shadow Society. Among the side characters, while I do like several of them, sadly, most can't be discussed in detail without getting into spoilers. However, among the supporting cast, the most relevant pair to talk about are Sean and John. John claims to be in love with Kate. That's not a spoiler. He just kind of blurts it out as a love at first sight kind of thing. And acts as one of her most loyal allies. However, he's not one of those characters who's doing it just for their love interest. You can tell he too cares about the mysteries and problems that they see in the Shadows house and how it affects him and his friends. John, however, is a dumbass. He gets easily carried away and acts before he thinks. But his sense of intuition is extremely sharp and has gotten people out of many sticky situations. Sean, on the other hand, is smart and reliable. He's less excitable than his master and more prone to taking deliberate actions. Although the rest of Kate's debut class are important characters, Sean and John have simply gotten more screen time than any of them. It is partially because they are the love interests, but also, more relevantly, and spoiler warning, They are the first ones, after Kate and Emilico, on the good guy side to be made aware of the truth of the Shadows House. On the other hand, there are villains and unknowns like Edward and the robed person. I won't go into details about who the robed person is or what their goals are, because obviously it's a huge spoiler, but I can say learning their identity has a lot of logical solutions and is great use of foreshadowing. Edward, on the other hand, works well as a physical embodiment of the problems of the Shadows House, since after all, he isn't doing anything wrong despite being an antagonist. By the standards of the Shadows House, he is merely doing what is expected of him. Also, if you're wondering about shipping other than Kate and John, then... Oh right, that's mostly spoilers, so that part's gonna be bleeped out. As for other characters, you'll see them eventually. Oh, and of course, there is the great-grandfather, the Lord of the Shadows House. Praise him. Warning! There are general spoilers in this section. I don't spoil anything major, but if you want to go in completely blind, or at least as blind as the other sections have allowed you, then you can skip to here. Before you go, allow me to address the complaint that there is no plot. While it's true that there is a bit of setup, there is a compelling plot that will hook you in if you give it a chance. Anyway, onto the plot. The first major arc after the setup chapters are done is the debut arc. The debut is a rite of passage and/or ceremony the shadows must pass before they are allowed to participate in Shadow Society proper. Prior to the debut, the shadows are only allowed to stay in their rooms while the living dolls are allowed outside, but only for general cleaning and must return to their rooms afterwards. Due to this, in the early chapters, only Emilico really gets a lot of interaction with the other characters, while Kate only really interacts with another shadow very briefly prior to the debut. During the actual debut, the rest of the main cast finally appears. This year's debut is a maze-solving problem. Each doll must find their master somewhere in the maze and return with them to the exit within an allotted time frame. All the while, the doll's face and the shadow's clothes must be kept clean. To make matters worse, it seems that Edward wants at least one pair to fail. While the debutantes overcome various obstacles, we get our first glimpse at the relationships and personalities of each debutante pair, as well as a sense of where their character arcs are going to go in the future. The next major arc is learning the identity of the mysterious robed shadow. They briefly appear in the aftermath of the first ghost incident and are implied to be the one causing the incidents. Kate and Emilico are attempting to uncover their identity because Kate ends up as a suspect. Kate recruits her debutante class to help out with the investigation, which they do to varying degrees. The other side characters start getting more fleshed out as the leads try to extract information from them to figure out who, if any of them, is the robed nobleman. Sprinkled all throughout the story are the mysteries that keep the reader compelled beyond the immediate plot, like what exactly are living dolls? Why make the dolls able to think if they shouldn't? Why don't the nobles of the Shadows House have faces? Why do they exhaust soot from their bodies? Who exactly is the great-grandfather? What is the Shadows House? Answering these questions is not always a primary concern of the series, and not all the answers of these questions are shocking revelations. Some of them aren't even that hard to deduce from just paying attention or meta-narrative guesswork. All told, it still forms good bait to hook you in. Best of all, the answers don't feel like asspulls. This is because one of the strongest aspects of Shadows House is the foreshadowing, not just for solving the mysteries, but also to subtly introduce various concepts that only get expounded upon later. Solutions to most problems/questions the characters encounter have their bases hinted at way earlier. I mean, just look at the panels that have been going over the screen. There's subtle foreshadowing in all those pages, but without context, you're probably looking at the wrong part and/or jumping to the wrong conclusions. Lastly, the series has pretty good pacing. Some people find the start slow, but as said, it is necessary. There aren't any filler arcs or filler chapters. Each chapter always moves things forward in some way. It also knows not to drag out arcs too long, to avoid arc fatigue, so by the end of the arc, we're still invested in what's going on. Now, allow me to pretend to be objective by giving some nitpicks to the series. Suit abilities seem like they could end up as asspulls because we don't know a limit of what they can do, other than not interacting well with water. Also, it sucks that the colored version is digital only, so there will never be a way for you to hold a colored version in your hands. Other than a Kindle, I guess. In conclusion, I'm bad at conclusions. Just go consume the series already. And I'm going to give it a inverse of how I felt about The Promised Neverland Season 2 over 10. And next time, I'll attempt not to sound like a robot in these reviews.